He gave the world Wolverine, the fierce mutant with unbreakable adamantium claws. He brought horror to life with Swamp Thing, a creature born from tragedy. He added heart and brains to Gotham with Lucius Fox. And he helped relaunch the X-Men with a bold new team that changed everything. Today, we're taking a look at comic books that define Len Wein's legendary career. From his earliest works to his final projects, we'll break down their fair market value and the CGC Census count for each issue. This is Creator Spotlight, Len Wein. What's going on, everybody, and welcome to the IzzyVerse. If this is the first time you're watching, thank you, and I'm pretty sure you're going to enjoy the show. We're going to be taking a look at the impact of Len Wein. I'm here with Shane from 1063 Comics. What can you tell me about Len Wein?
Well, it's so funny that you messaged me today about possibly doing him, and I'm like, oh, I'm gonna have to look, and because I knew he was an editor at Marvel, so I knew that right away. But then when we were just kind of flipping through stuff, I'm like, oh, this is going to be really good because, like, a lot of the books that we're going to talk about, I either want or I have.
Or you really want and you can't have.
Yes. There's one of those in there or two.
Yeah. Now, the reason why we picked Len Wein this week is because this week would have been his birthday. In fact, his birthday was on June 12th of 1968. So therefore, and as of this recording,
48.
48. Thank you. I said 68. 48. Thank you. And as of this recording, it's actually his birthday. So I've said, why not do it? And why not? So we got some really good stuff to show you guys, some of which you're very familiar with, some of which you may not be so familiar with. And if you get a chance, take a moment, like the video, and if you like this stuff, subscribe to the IzzyVerse. And we will have an article up on Go Collect in the next couple of weeks that you could actually go into and see the price values of these books. So with that said, let's just go into the bio. Len Wein was a legendary comic book writer and editor who helped shape the modern superhero era. He co-created major characters like Wolverine, Swamp Thing, Storm, Nightcrawler, Colossus, and Lucius Fox. His work on Giant Size X-Men #1 helped relaunch the X-Men, turning them into one of Marvel's biggest franchises, and pretty much the biggest in the 80s. In DC, his creation of Swamp Thing introduced horror and depth into superhero comics. As an editor, Wein guided landmark titles like The Watchmen and the New Teen Titans, helping shape the tone of the 1980s comic book boom. Known for strong character writing and smart storytelling, Wein left an indelible mark across both companies. His influence still echoes in comics, movies, and TV today. Len Wein did pass away in 2017, but his work continues to inspire generations. And you know, most of the photos I've seen of Len Wein, he just looks like he was just a cool guy.
Yeah.
Like he's just one of the fellas. People seem to like him. I don't really hear bad things about him. He was a powerful editor during his heyday. Pretty much where Marvel had Jim Shooter, DC had Len Wein. During that time, and he helped ushered in. We talked about New Teen Titans, but Watchmen, and under his belt, you got Dark Knight Returns, you got Crisis on Infinite Earths. So he's helping mold a new DC, and really the DC we know and love today comes from his writing.
Yeah, and like he was kind of at the helm for what in the 80s were two of the biggest team books, which Uncanny X-Men and Teen Titans. So that's pretty impressive. I mean, and there were strong teams on those books too, like artists, writers for both series. So, I'm sure that what an awesome time to be like involved in that. Just must have been amazing.
Yeah. Let's take a look at his first work in Teen Titans 18 back in 1968 for DC Comics. At a high sale, this book is at $21,000 at a 9.8. That was December 25th of 2023. The last sale of this book was $8 at a very good, and that was in May. That's also the fair market value for a very good price on average, and $130 for a 9.2. There's currently 88 copies in the census today. This is his very first published comic book work, and it so happens to be a DC Comics. Another thing that's very interesting, this is the first appearance of a character by the name of Starfire.
Oh
But
wow.
but it wasn't Starfire from the new Teen Titans. In fact, it's the character that's in the cover today. In
Yeah, it's
that
so
you're looking,
interesting. I mean, look at that difference in the 9298
yeah.
value. That is amazing.
Hmm.
Wow.
Yeah,
It,
it's a
every
pretty
notch matters.
but at the same time, 9.2s and 9.2s. People look at 9.6 as being lesser than a 9.8, and then there's usually this huge price difference. At the same token, we're talking about 2023 numbers here. So we're looking at this time, roughly around this time, where people are spending more than they're supposed to
Yeah.
for comics. But it's interesting that he created a character named Starfire, and it's not the Starfire we know and love today. So
Yeah. Just kind of shows how, that mind, it comes up with a name because it's a cool name, right? But it just doesn't quite fit with the character until later on they do something with it.
yeah, and him and Marv Wolfman, they do collaborate quite a bit. So I'm sure there was discussion about let's just reuse this name.
Yeah.
And we're talking about 1968 to 70. So in 68, I don't think anybody was really paying attention like that
Yeah.
when it comes to names, because we're talking about, almost 20 years later in the 80s, they're saying, okay, let's just call her Starfire. And I don't think there's someone saying, well, excuse me, you already have a Starfire, and
Mhm.
it's this guy, he's wearing this green thing, kind of looks like a, dollar store Green Lantern with a
Yeah.
star in his front. Not exactly a great looking costume, but it's interesting to note Starfire first appeared in Teen Titans 18, but not the Starfire you know.
Yeah.
All right, let's take a look at our next book, and that is Tower of Shadows #3. This book came out in 1969 from Marvel Comics. A high sale of this book was $2,160 at 9.8. That was February of 2022. As of today, the last book sold was $7 at a fine in May, and the raws are going for about $10. Very good. While you could pick up on average a 9.4 for $150. There's currently 67 copies in the census, and this is his first Marvel comic book in which it's part of a horror anthology story, which is something that he contributed quite a bit. The story he worked on was a story alongside Gene Colan, and that's a legendary artist, which one day we'll cover.
Yeah. Yeah. Agreed. This one, surprise, I've never even heard of this book.
Mhm.
But 150 for a 9.4 from 1969, that's not bad.
No, and $2,000 for a book like this, where if you know it's his first Marvel work, I guess it's worth the price. But if you don't know, you got to ask yourself the question, like, huh, why?
Yeah.
It doesn't stand out or anything like that. But that's just how a lot of these first time writing books are. We've covered this so many times beforehand, where someone's first work really doesn't get any much love, largely because people don't know it's his or her first work.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Totally. I love trying to find these type of books.
Avengers 85. This book came out in 1970 for Marvel Comics. High sale of this book was $10,000 at 9.8. That was in March of 2022. The last sale of this book was $20 at a no grade, and that was just recent. Raws are going for about $64 fine, while the graded copies are going for $330 for a 9.4. There's currently 846 copies in the census, and the reason why this book is important is the first team appearance of the Squadron Supreme, at the time known as Squadron Sinister. They apparently they love the Squadron, but they can't figure out whether their name is Supreme, Sinister, or just something else. Which also means it's the first appearance of Hyperion, Doctor Spectre, Lady Lark, Wizard, and Nighthawk. All of these are derivative characters of the Justice League, but within Marvel Comics.
Oh man, Wizard. Just love it.
What's his superpower? He pees really fast.
Yeah, he can pee whenever he wants. Oh man, it's just so good.
What's
But
your thoughts on the Squadron Supreme in general, though?
so I've never really been into the Squadron Supreme. It's if if I happen across it, like I kind of recognize the names like Hyperion, that type of thing. But as for the rest of it, like this in this age, like my first comics were like, Spider-Man, and I
Mhm,
didn't even know anything about the Avengers. So
mhm. Squadron Supreme, I do have a nice soft spot for Squadron Supreme. I really enjoy those comics and I enjoy the storytelling behind them. I love the fact that they really are the Justice League within the Marvel universe. They're meant to be that. They're a parody of that. And that was done intentional. I thought it's interesting that Len Wein had a hand in that in doing the creation of these characters. And I'm more curious to see why it happened and why they decided to do that. And of course, they became more of a serious, parody of the Justice League in what would these characters look like if they were corrupt in some way, or better yet, set in a real life environment. So what we're seeing here with the Squadron Supreme is kind of like the precursor of what Watchmen will eventually become.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it's a good kind of test bed for that type of
Mhm.
story.
And Len Wein did have his hand on Watchmen, even though he himself didn't write Watchmen. We will talk a little bit about Watchmen much later on in this video. And I think these guys were kind of the prototype for that.
Yeah, agreed.
Mhm. Right. Now we're going to some biggies. This is a big one. In fact, this could be one of the biggest. I don't think it's the biggest because we do have some other ones. House of Secret 92. This book came out in 1971 for DC Comics. I sold this book $90,000 at a 9.8. That was in September of 2021. The last recorded sale since this recording was $1,560 at a 5.5. Raws are going for $842 at a very good, and that's on the average, and $2,031 for a 7.0 on average. There's currently 3,827 copies in the census. This is the first appearance of Swamp Thing Alex Olsen, and it's also the iconic Bernie Wrightson cover. What can you tell me about this one?
Yeah, this is another one that I know the cover. I love Wrightson's art, and but this is a character that again, back when I was in my youth, this came out the year I was born actually. Um, I was more gravitated towards Spider-Man, so I had heard of Swamp Thing, and and very interesting um, reading about the writer's room with Swamp Thing and Man Thing, with
Mhm.
the two people, like just kind of very interesting for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And what's Swamp Thing became a bigger thing in the 80s with Alan Moore's writing of it. But of course, Len Wein was involved in that process as well as an editor at that time. But this was the rise of Bronze Age horror comics, which Len Wein was a big part of. And with Swamp Thing, which this is his first appearance, but it's not the first appearance of the actual Swamp Thing we know and love. This is really a prototype of what will eventually become the Swamp Thing we know and love. And since I mentioned it, Swamp Thing #1, which is the first appearance of Alex Holland, the Swamp Thing we know. This book came out in 1972 for DC Comics. $6,000 and 9.8 was the high sale in November of 2021. The last sale of this book was $111 at a very fine, and that was just a couple of days ago. This book on Raw is $118 fine, $360 for an 8.5 on average. There's currently $3,560. And just as I mentioned, this is the first appearance and origin of the second Swamp Thing, another iconic Bernie Wrightson cover. This is Alex Holland.
Yeah, I love this cover. I think I like this one better than the other one actually,
Mm-hmm.
because you get more Swamp Thing in there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I actually convinced my oldest to buy the #1 of the next volume of Swamp Thing because I was like, get the one you can afford, and so we picked that one up. But yeah, I've only read a few Swamp Thing books, and one of them was it was called Green Hell, and it was awesome. So I really do like that character.
Yeah, Swamp Thing is one of those characters. He's such a good character, especially, like I mentioned before, Alan Moore has done some great work, but there are some other ones that are out there that's equally as good, because the understanding of who Swamp Thing is more important than the fact that it's a horror story. It's like this is a character that is not really a man, but thinks he's a man. And there's some dynamics of it that is just amazing. And it is the blend of horror and superhero comics where, it's not on this list, but we talk about Swamp Thing issue number 8, where Swamp Thing meets Batman. It's kind of like the two get together, because beforehand Swamp Thing was in this area and then the superhero world was in a different area. And that issue kind of like brought them together. He then becomes part of Justice League Dark, and he's incorporated within DCU where other horror characters really weren't. So he kind of bridged the gap. And then we get characters like Constantine and other ones just like him.
Yeah, and I was going to say that I love, because I was reading Batman, so I always loved it when Swamp Thing showed up. I thought it was really well done. He does show up in the recent run of Poison Ivy here and there, which is also cool.
Perfect character to meet up with, right?
Yeah.
All right, let's take a look at our next book. And our next book, I was surprised to know, was Supergirl #1, which came out in 1972 for DC Comics. High sale of this book is $550 and 9.8. That was in February of 2021. The last sale of this book was $260 at a 9.6. Fair market value for the raws are $25 fine, while $83 at a 9.0. There's currently 681 copies in the census. It is the first Supergirl ongoing series in which Len Wein wrote his backup story for this book with Marv Wolfman. I mentioned Marv Wolfman, but I thought it was interesting that it wasn't until 1972 that Supergirl finally gets her own comic book.
Yeah, exactly. Because her first appearance, I think, is in '59.
Mm-hmm.
I remember
Something
right.
like that. Yeah.
So that's a big difference in time for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is not really the same type of Supergirl. Her costume here is very what's the word? Scandalous.
Well, it's very '70s.
Yeah, it's very 70s. She got a little V-neck going on. Her skirt just keeps getting shorter and shorter. I don't know. What were they thinking in the 70s? Just saying. Anyway, moving on to our next book here. It's another one that caught me by surprise, but one that was a nice, pleasant surprise. And that is Strange Tales 169. This book came out in 1973 from Marvel Comics. The high sale of this book is $27,000 and 9.8. That was in May of 2021. The last sale of this book was $120 at a very good, while the raws are going for $153 fine. The graded copies are going for approximately $354 and an 8.5. There's currently 2,491 copies in the census. This is the first appearance of Brother Voodoo.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, Izzy, between you and me, I'm hunting this book. I had it in my hand. I almost bought it at the con in an 8.5, actually. I really, really believe that Brother Voodoo is coming to movies or whatever, and I can't wait. I think the character's great. I think it's a great new addition to kind of the magic users in the Marvel universe. So I'm out there. I'm trying to find this book, and I'll get it sometime this year.
Now, I might be wrong because I don't have any information to say otherwise, but I do believe Brother Voodoo did come out in a live action adaptation. In some comic book format of something. Maybe it was a TV series, or my brain is telling me that there was a live action Brother Voodoo somewhere. Obviously, it didn't go anywhere. And I'm with you. The time will come. It's coming closer than we think. It could be within a Doctor Strange movie, which is where he's largely associated because he does become the Sorcerer Supreme at one time or another in comics. He's a black character, so that's something that's, you know, you can get a target audience outside of Black Panther with the African American community, that you say, here's another character, and Brother Voodoo just happens to be one of those cool characters. You could base it off of Louisiana, you know, New Orleans. There's so much potential with a character like this, and I'm with you. I think we're just, the days are sooner rather than later for this character.
Yeah, I think in all likelihood, like if I had to hedge my bets on either a Doctor Strange appearance or something to do with Strange Academy,
Mhm.
like either of those is pretty likely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. We're now going to, I think you could say, Len Wein's greatest creation. And that's saying a lot, being that we just talked about Swamp Thing. Incredible Hulk 180. This book came out in 1974 from Marvel Comics. The high sale of this book is $40.8 thousand. That was in September of 2023. The last sale of this book was $1,325 at a 9.0. That was actually a pretty good price. Raws are going for $282. Very good. $907 at 8.5. There's currently 9,366 copies. This is what many believe to be called the very first appearance of Wolverine. It's his cameo. It's a cameo. Come on.
It's still good. He's still in the whole page, names himself.
Yeah.
It's a pretty big book. I can just imagine, you know, years ago, just before all the facsimiles start coming out, you know, Marvel, they're all in their office and they're like, man, why can't we make some of that money? Like, people are buying these old books for all this money, but we need some of that money. Well, just release it again. Get out of here, intern. Okay, yeah, no one heard that, right? We're just going to release them again.
Well, that's the whole point of the facsimiles now, right?
Yeah.
The
More
whole
money in
purpose of,
Marvel's pockets.
yeah, but it's nowhere near the price like this.
No, but
right?
they're still getting their cut for sure.
But let's take a look at the other one, and that's 181. That one came out the very following month, 1974, from Marvel Comics. The high sale of this book, $138,000. That was in September of 2022. Last sale of this book was $2,401 at a 6.0. The fair market value is $2,637 at a fine, $3,793 at a 7.5. There's currently 19,010 comics in the CGC Census, and this is the first full and the first cover appearance of Logan himself, the Wolverine.
Okay, let me ask you this, Izzy. How many comics do you own, approximately?
That's a good. I got about 30 boxes, 30 short boxes.
30 short boxes, so 30 times about 150.
Probably a little bit more than that.
So like 5,000 or 6,000.
Okay.
About, if we're being conservative. Now, I will sell you a Incredible Hulk 181 for all of your books. What's the lowest grade you're going to take for all of them?
Because of what's in my collection.
Yeah, it's all got to go.
My collection, like you said, you were very modest with the price. My collection has some really good keys in it, which include graded books.
Oh, I wasn't saying $6,000, 6,000 comics.
Yeah. If you take all my non-keys, I'll take a 5.0.
No, we want all of it. We want everything.
No. If you take my keys, then it's gotta be above an 8. Has to be above an 8.
That's okay.
But I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't give up all these comics for the one. I'm sorry, I won't do that.
I'd seriously think about it, for sure.
Yeah. I know it makes this room a lot emptier. I'll tell you that much.
Well, there would be something freeing about it, right? It'd be like,
you just get rid of everything up here, and then you have that one book.
You have one book and you just carry around your whole collection with you. Look at my collection.
It's my collection right there, guys. That's it. That's what you get. It is something. What I always love about this book is Wolverine's mask wasn't intentionally, it was done like that because he was supposed to look more like an actual Wolverine. Also, the intention of the claws were not meant to be part of his anatomy, right? So it was, the assumption was that these were put on claws, right? And he was, at this particular time, he wasn't a mutant. He wasn't labeled as a mutant. But what they ended up doing is they were like, there's something about this character that people are gravitating towards. We can't quite figure it out just yet, because he shows up in 181, and he has a very, very small role in 182. Like, he's like in the first page. He's like the opposite of cameo.
Right.
You know what I mean, in 182, and then Hulk goes on his merry way. We don't see Wolverine again for about, I want to say, for about a year or two. We don't see Wolverine again. But there's something about this character, there's something about his look, even the attitude, that, guys like Len Wein was like, we got to use this guy again someday.
I think it was because he was Canadian.
You think that's what it is?
I think that's why he's so popular.
He's a Canuck.
Yeah.
Hey, look, it says it right there, Canadian superhero.
That's right. It's right there in the first appearance, people.
It's right there.
Right,
it's no doubt he's Canadian. And I do remember when Origin was coming out, there was discussion of finding out maybe he's not Canadian, where it was like, no, dude, if you do that, you are going to piss off a whole nation.
Yeah.
So they didn't go that route. Smart of them not to do that.
Don't take our Wolverine from us.
No, exactly. All right. So before we move on, before we start talking more about Wolverine, let's go to our next book, and that's Giant Size Fantastic Four, number 4. This book came out in 1974 from Marvel Comics. The high sale of this book is $800 at 9.0. That was back in July of 2021. Last sale of this book was $10 at a fine, and that seems to be the fair market value as well. 7.0s are going for about $90. There's 566 copies in the census. This is the first appearance of Multiple Man, Jamie Madrox, and it was co-written with Chris Claremont. So what we talked a little bit about Madrox beforehand, when we would talk about Peter David. It's interesting that this character debuted in Fantastic Four.
Yeah, and it's another example of one of those characters that they debut like Wolverine, and then they figure out, hey, this is a really cool idea. And he's the type of character that once they figure out mutants, it's like, oh, this guy can easily be a mutant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Multiple Man, again, he's one of those characters that, when written right, you could do so much with. And I think that, we're talking about Len Wein here, but that was the magic of what Peter David did with this character. I think one of the things I like about Len Wein is specifically is how he creates these characters and kind of like hands them off. Yeah. That's kind of like his MO. He makes these characters and hands them off to someone else so that they could do magic with these characters. So he was very much a corporate guy in that way. Yeah, no, he didn't hold on to a character. He just let that character be its own thing. And this is a prime example of a character that years later, we're talking years later, they took advantage of again. And Peter David found something in Multiple Man, and Len Wein was the guy who created the guy originally, and said, here you go, have at it.
Yeah, and you're going to see the ultimate example of that coming up. I don't know if it's next or not. I can't remember, but I mean...
You mean this one?
Yes.
The other Giant Size book, and it's Giant Size X-Men number 1, 1975 from Marvel Comics. $170,000 at a 9.9, and that was last year at the same time. Whew! A no grade just recently sold for $620. Oh my goodness, I'm dying to see what's in that no grade. The raws, however, goes for about $1,000, $1,747. So very good. 8.5 is the average with $3,512. There's currently 14,469 copies in the census. This is the first appearance of Colossus, Nightcrawler, Storm, Ilyan Rasputin, and Thunderbird. It's also the first appearance of Krakoa. More importantly, it's the first team appearance of the all-new, all-different X-Men. Second appearance of the Wolverine.
Yeah. Yeah, and to go on to be part of a massively long run that got started right in this book, and it's just unbelievable. I hope to own this one someday. This is probably the biggest book I would ever expect to own in my collection, I think.
Now, would you give up your whole collection for this one?
I'd seriously think about it depending on the grade, and I've got about 17,000 books.
Yeah. Yeah, because which one's bigger to you? 181 or giant size at 1?
I've got more of a connection to giant size because I love all those characters. And you get the second appearance of Wolverine. So
yeah, and you get the new look.
Yeah.
Which is the one which was done by accident.
Yeah.
So when the artist was doing the work, Gil Kane was doing the art, he made a mistake on the mask. And they said, you know what? It looks better this way anyway.
Or did he?
Only we don't know the story anymore, do we? Because they took it to their graves.
That's right.
Right. So this is one of those books to me that since I was a kid, I've loved this cover. It's so important to the lore of X-Men. I believe this book is more important than X-Men #1. Now, you need X-Men #1 to get giant size X-Men. I understand that. But as far as the importance go, I think this was more important because this is the X-Men that people fell in love with.
Yeah, like on that side of the argument, I would definitely agree, because if you look at X-Men and the early issues, it really struggled. Like, they went into reprints because it wasn't selling. You know, they didn't even want to redo it. And then finally this book hits and they go, okay, let's give it another shot. And then this goes on to have a much, much more established and amazing run of books than the original ever did. The original really had a run from 1 to 67, I think, before the reprints start. Can't remember the exact number.
And you had Neil Adams on it, which was like, you had your top artist on this book, and it still wasn't performing.
Then you go on to have a run of, 94 to basically 541 or something.
Yeah, and you got to give thanks to one guy, really, and that's Chris Claremont. He did have amazing artists with him, but Chris Claremont created the soap opera we know as X-Men.
Oh yeah, and you got tidbits all the time. That's the thing that's missing from comics today, I really believe, is they want to have everything just out there and done in 5 or 6 issues, where Claremont had stuff that paid off dozens and dozens of issues later. And that's all thanks to this book.
I agree. Like, Krakoa is this book, and we don't get to Krakoa much later, right? Yep. So there you have it. Giant size X-Men #1. Let's get a little more modest, but we still have a character that I think is very underappreciated. And that is a character within the pages of Amazing Spider-Man 162. This book came out in 1976 from Marvel Comics. High sale of this book is $1,320, 9.8. That was September of 2022. The last sale was $97 at a near mint. That's not bad, near mint. Very fine copy goes for about $18. That's the average on the raws. However, the grades are going for about $220 and 9.6. There's 1,560 copies in the census. This features a guest starring role of Nightcrawler as well as the Punisher, but more importantly, this is the first appearance of Jigsaw, who would become one of Punisher's greatest villains. Now, we all know the problem with Punisher's villains is that he kills them. So Jigsaw's the one guy he cannot seem to kill. And all his other villains are associated with other heroes like Kingpin or Bullseye, but really Jigsaw is primarily a Punisher villain.
Oh yeah, 100%. It's kind of like, Kingpin's first appearance is Amazing Spider-Man, but he goes on to become a little bit more of a daredevil character than a Spider-Man character. And it's the same with this. You know, I imagine that Punisher is at this point, you know, they're testing it out to see, hey, we've kind of got some good response from this character. And now they're testing things out because you've got a kind of solid book in Amazing Spider-Man, and then these characters will go on to other books, which is really cool.
Yeah, I agree. And if anybody has watched the Punisher Netflix series, Jigsaw is a big part of it. They tell a long story with that character because in the first series, in the first season, he's not Jigsaw.
Yeah.
He's like his best friend, and you know, he turns out to be a scumbag. In the second season, he becomes Jigsaw. So I
Yeah.
like how they did it there. Like I say, he is an underrated villain, but he's Punisher's main villain, really.
Yeah. And it goes back to what you were saying earlier. Like, exactly. Like, Len is like, he's just starting the snowball down the hill and going, hey, here's some stuff for you to use.
Mm-hmm.
And then other creators grab onto it and go, hey, this Jigsaw character, that's pretty cool. Like, we can use that.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. All right, here's another character that's really a supporting character, but he's a very important supporting character, and that's the character that's in Batman 307 that came out in 1978 for DC Comics. High sale of this book is $523 at 9.8. That was in June of last year. Last sales, this book was $5 at a no grade. That was sometime in May, and the raws are going for about $34 fine, $258 at 9.6. There's currently 213 comics in the census. This is the first appearance of Lucius Fox, who happens to be the guy that is responsible for all of Batman's tech. A supporting character that we didn't get to know much about Lucius Fox until we get Batman Begins in the 2000s. So talk to me a little bit more about Lucius Fox and what you...
Well, again, just like we were saying, you know, develops this character, and you know, like you said, it's kind of comes out. The issue comes out, and it's not really remembered that much in value compared to the other ones that we've been looking at. But then you get to other creators, and they go, "Wow, we got this. We need like something with Bruce Wayne," and then they like Lucius Fox comes into play, and like basically Morgan Freeman, I love that portrayal of him in that movie. He does an excellent job.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree. And Lucius Fox, he was, again, it wasn't until 1978 they created, like, we needed somebody to make all the Batman gear. We need someone to make this because how does he do it? And more importantly, how does nobody find out?
Yeah,
Right? So Lucius is that character that he has to know his secret, right?
yeah,
He has to,
yeah,
because he's constantly making this stuff for Bruce. And sooner or later, Bruce has to, share it with him because he's given him the gear.
yeah.
And
I love
and
that
I
scene.
yeah, and I absolutely love what Morgan Freeman did and what Christopher Nolan did in Batman Begins to give us this character and kind of make him who he is and say, just tell me what's going on so I don't have to lie when they ask
Yeah,
me,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
Exactly. And it again, it all starts back with the written story of a character that, you know, did Len think that this was going to become such a character? I don't think so, but he obviously has a knack for being able to develop a character that can go in a different direction if needed.
Agreed. All right. And speaking of Lucius Fox, our next book is Batman 313. This book also came out in 1978 for DC Comics. Last high sale of this book was $1,999, just shy of $2,000 at a 9.8. That was in November of 2021. Last sale of this book was $64 at a 9.4. The raws are going for about $45 fine, while the graded copies are going for $177 at a 9.6. There's currently 654 copies in the census. This is the first appearance of Jace, Tim Fox, who would later become the Batman of New York City after reuniting with his family. He was estranged to Lucius, but he ends up becoming the new Batman in Future State, and then eventually becomes the I Am Batman series, which for the most part, I don't think many people gravitated too much about it because, again, he's one of those characters. But you could tell me more about it.
Izzy, I was just going to say that. Like, I loved that run of I Am Batman. That was what the subsequent series was called. I thought it was excellent, and I was disappointed when it kind of ended. And I kind of felt like the whole time, like, am I the only one reading this? Because
Probably were.
I don't understand. Like, it was so well written, the art was good, and again, this is the overall theme of this whole video, is that all of that comes from this early development and an idea for a character that gets exploded out and explored much more in depth later. And it just happens so often that it's not a coincidence anymore.
Yeah, and I will agree, because again, he's one of those guys. Len Wein just has this tendency of just creating characters and just letting them live off, pretty
Yep.
much. Right. Another character that I think better days are coming for this character, and that's a character that debuted in DC Comics Presents 27 that came out in 1980 for DC Comics. The last high sale, not the last sale, but the high sale of this book was $1,599 at a 9.8. That was in August of 2021. Last sale of this book was $22 at a fine, and $23 is really what the average is on the Raws, while 9.6 is the average that goes for $66. 595 copies in the census. This is the first appearance of Mongle. Mongle is a character that I think he will be big someday.
Well, it's a good time to get this book then. Like, I don't know much about Mongle, that's for sure.
So Mongle is very much one of these he's kind of like Mojo in a way. He does this War Worlds type of thing where he likes to collect champions and stuff like that. So he has a bit of a Caesar complex. He's super powerful. He is a major threat to Superman, and we know Superman's rogue gallery really isn't that huge. But Mongol's just one of those things. He's in that same level as Darkseid, Darkseid, Thanos, that kind of level of a villain. So, and the thing is with him, we have seen glimpses of him in animated form, but we have yet to see any types of glimpse of him in a live action form. And I do believe if the DCU becomes successful, which last I saw, it looks like it's getting there, I think Mongle is one of those characters they could tap on, maybe even before they go back on the well with Darkseid, and say, let's do Mongle. Let's see how people look at it. Because let's be honest, before the Avengers, no one really knew anything about Thanos except for those of us that read Infinity Gauntlet and things like that. We knew he was a major threat, but the average day, viewer that watched movies and TV, no one knew who he was. No one knew him.
Yeah.
And now he's like the greatest villains to many people.
This is a perfect, when you start to pay attention to, creative people like James Gunn, you start to see a pattern. And, you look at Guardians, a whole bunch of people that no one knew anything about, and he turns them into $1 billion franchise. And Mongle could be that same thing at DC for them. No one knows who he is, but there'll be an announcement and then everybody will be buying this book, and it won't be $66 for a 9.6. I'll tell you that.
I agree. It'll be closer to that 1,599 and a 9.8.
Yeah. If I could buy one of those right now for that, I would. So I'm going to look for it after this.
Mm-hmm. It's definitely one to, I personally believe it's one to look after. In fact, next week when I go to Heroes Con, this is one of those books that I'm going to be hunting. I just got to remember to hunt for it.
If you see a 9.6 for $66, buy it.
Oh, I think I'm pretty sure 9.8 is not that much more. That was 2021, so we know that was at the boom. So
yeah,
this is a spec. This is a spec book, long-term spec that I think is going to pay off at the end. That's my personal thoughts. All right, another book that's on our list that I think is a fun book to have and that's Blue Beetle number 1, 1986 for DC Comics. The high sale of this book was $225 at a 9.8. That was September of 2022. Last sale of this book was $19 at a very fine, which is about the same price as the average Raws for $18. 9.6 is the average, and those go for about $40. 473 copies in the census. This is the first Blue Beetle Ted Kord in the DC universe, in DC Comics. They were purchased by DC Comics from Charleston, and we have a great character in Ted Kord Blue Beetle. I love this Blue Beetle.
Yeah, so I don't know a whole lot about Blue Beetle, but a book like this always highlights to me kind of the difference in DC versus Marvel, like values for characters of this same level.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, like a $40 9.6, $200 9.8 for the first, you know, first appearance at Marvel type of thing. You know, if that was the case, it would be a lot more money.
Yeah. And with this Blue Beetle, this is the one that became best friends with Booster Gold. He's kind of a Batman character. You know, he's driven from the Batman, kind of the same concept, but the difference between him and Bruce is that he's more fun going.
Yeah.
So he's kind of like where Tony Stark and Bruce Wayne kind of meet in the middle. That's kind of where Ted Kord finds himself. Where you don't take him too seriously. This is the third rendition of Blue Beetle. So this is the Copper Age Blue Beetle, I guess we'll call him. Because then we get, you know, Hyman Reyes much later. Len Wein didn't create this Blue Beetle, but he brought him into the DC world.
Right.
Right. Another characters that Len Wein reinvented for DC Universe was found in Legends issue number 3, and that came out in 1986 for DC Comics. High sale of this book's $159 and 9.8, and that was in March of 2022. Check this out. $1 was the last sale of the fine. $5 seems to be the average, however, at a very fine. $60 for 9.8. There's 1,590 copies in the census. This is the first appearance of the new rendition of the Suicide Squad, which is also the first appearance of the post-crisis Captain Boomerang, which is probably the most famous character within the Suicide Squad.
Yeah, and this was a good series. I read this when it came out, and there was lots of hype around this.
Yeah.
No one kind of really knew that Waller would turn into the character that she did, but this was a fun read nonetheless.
Definitely worth checking out. Like you said, issue number 1 is the first appearance of Amanda Waller, so it just makes sense that the Suicide Squad would show up sooner or later, and they showed up in this issue. All right. Here's another character that was reinvented post-crisis, and I think this is the character that we know to be the Cheetah, and that's Wonder Woman issue number 9. This book came out in 1987 for DC Comics. High sale of this book is $165 and 9.8. That was in November of 2019. $10 is the last sale at a fine, and that also seems to be the fair market value for the Raws. $68 is the fair market value at a 9.8. 492 copies in the census. As I mentioned, this is the first appearance of Cheetah, Barbara Minerva, and this is the post-crisis version of the Cheetah. This is the same Cheetah that was utilized in Wonder Woman 1984. So take that with a grain of salt. But I personally love this version of Cheetah because the previous one, it was really it was a costume. This one is more like, oh no, she has the powers of a cheetah.
Yeah. And I have the omnibus of this whole run that I really got to sit down and read again because I've read most of them, but they're so good. Like again, you know, kind of leading the reins and with Len there, and you've got Wolfman, you got Perez. I mean, how awesome would those staff meetings be?
I know, right? Okay, we got one more book in our list. It's a book that was one of his later books, so towards the end of his career before he passed away. What's more significant is what was before this book, and that's before Watchmen. Ozymandias #1. This book came out in 2012 for DC Comics. The high sale was $154 and 9.8. That was in August of 2024. Last sale of this book was $3 near mint. That's also the fair market value at the Raws. 9.8s are going for about $50 now. There's only 40 copies in the series. This is a prequel to The Watchmen. Now, what's important to note is Len Wein was part of the original team that helped Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons create The Watchmen. Ultimately, it's Alan Moore's work. It's Dave Gibbons' work, when Len Wein was pretty much the editor responsible to make that happen. So he did come back to do this character. And Ozymandias is one of those interesting characters where he's a villain, but his intentions are meant to be good.
Yeah. And you can't really underestimate the power that an editor has to kind of direct things. I mean, we can say that obviously it was Moore and Gibbons that created it, which is true. There's no doubt about that, and there's no dispute about it. But under a different editorial, maybe that gets pushed and goes, we're not doing that right now. We're going to focus on this. And to have them there at the right time to be able to either recognize or just kind of let the creatives do their thing is pretty impressive. So it is a testament to Len as well, just being in the editorial chair and kind of steering the ship, so to speak.
Yeah, and you know what? Honestly, I wish editors today would be more like that than they are today, unfortunately. I think today editors, I hate to say it, it's kind of like with baseball or other sports where they may have the title, but they're not doing the job. And it's taken from above, and they just have to follow orders and do things a certain way, which I think is a lost art, because I think a good editor responsibility is to get the best out of their team, not to give out the orders of how we want this done. And I think that's something that's lost in today in comics, where we don't really have, there's really not a lot of editors out there that are like, I'm sure they mean well. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to say anything bad about their work, but they're not they're not letting their creative team be creative as much as they used to. And I think that's something that's lost in today's world.
Yeah, totally agree.
All right. And with that said, that is our list. Tell me what you think. Do you have any of these comic books? Do you want any of these comic books? I'm pretty sure there's a few that you want. But if you have them, let me know which ones you do have. Let me know if I missed anything. What did I miss? Because these were only 20 books, and I'm sure Len Wein's career spans 4 decades, so there's more out there. I'd love to know what your thoughts are in the comments. Please leave a comment, and make sure you hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel if you enjoy this stuff. We have content like this all the time. And huge shout out to Go Collect as well as Global Comics, who help sponsor this show and this channel. Thank you so much for watching. And until next time, Excelsior. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more comic content. Check out these other videos for even more insight. And I'll see you at the next one. Excelsior.